Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a great post-reception experience. So I am about to have the pleasure of introducing the Learning at Scale keynote. But before that, we have a little administrative treat for you, which is an announcement by Ryan Baker on the next location of the festival next year. So I'll invite Ryan to come up and tell us about that.
Hello. Yeah. So we had so much fun here in Seoul. These slides were originally written assuming it'd be the last day, so apologies. We're gonna have so much fun here in Seoul that we're gonna decide to do it again next year, have the festival, and it'll be in Adelaide, South Australia. In brief, these are things you're really gonna see on the trip. That down at the bottom is the convention center we hope to be holding it in. That's the wine country. That's the beach, which is a 30-minute train ride away from the venue. That's the university's pro-vice chancellor. Other great views of things you can see, the Derenberg Cube in the middle of an amazing vineyard where you can have wine and see a world-renowned gallery of art by Salvador Dali. And that's our deputy vice chancellor there. Where is Adelaide, I get asked? We're at the bottom. We're at the bottom. We're on the, I guess the equivalent of the Antarctic Ocean. We have direct flights to a lot of places, so don't worry about getting there. We do have an airport. I was asked. How long are the flights? Quite brief and short, provided you're flying there from Melbourne. Yeah, you know, it's a lovely place. It's a bit far. Save the dates, July 18 to 23. I see people getting out their phones, so I'll pause a sec. What's the weather like in July? That's the next question I get asked. It's a pleasant respite from the heat of North America and Europe, and here. The average high in July is 16 Celsius, 61 Fahrenheit. The average low is 8 Celsius or 48 Fahrenheit. You're not going to see much lower. It's unlikely to see lower than 4 or 5 Celsius, so that's kind of the low 40s. It drizzles 9 days a month. You can think of it as being winter weather like Malaga, Spain, or San Francisco, California. There I am on the coldest day of the year. So you can see all the greenery behind me. You can see I'm wearing a light hat and a light jacket. It's not that bad. In other news, it's the season for Packham pears and oranges. Oh my gosh, they're great. You gotta go to the grocery store while you're there and get some of those. Packham pears are amazing. You're only gonna get them there and I guess like in Seattle, Oregon. So, conference general chairs. Me, Srezko Joksimovic. Srezko, you're here, right? Oh yeah, there in the corner. Yeah. Go ahead and say hello to Srezko at some point. And other folks from Adelaide are here at the conference. Quickly stand up so people can see you. I can't see anything, but all right, a few people. Yes, say hello. Go and ask them questions if you have questions about what it's like. So we'll see you in Adelaide.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Exciting. Gonna pack my bags already for that. All right, now is time for me to announce Ashok Goel, who is a computer science professor and human-centered computing in the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Institute of Technology, and chief scientist with Georgia Tech's Center for 21st Century Universities. For more than 35 years, he has conducted research into cognitive systems at the intersection of artificial intelligence and cognitive science, with a focus on computing design and creativity. For the last decade, his research has increasingly focused on AI in education and education in AI. He's a fellow of AAAI and the Cognitive Science Society, an editor emeritus of AAAI's AI magazine, and a recipient of AAAI's Outstanding AI Educator Award. He is the current executive director of the National AI Institute for Adult Learning and Online Education, sponsored by the U.S. National Science Foundation and headquartered at Georgia Tech. Also a contributor to previous proceedings of Learning at Scale. So please help me in welcoming our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Zach, for the kind invitation to give this talk and also for the generous introduction. So I want to begin by framing a problem. According to the World Economic Forum, they publish a jobs report every 1 or 2 years. In 2023, they projected that 44% of workers' skills will be disrupted by AI. That's about 60 million American workers. This is just for the United States. In 2025, just last year, they changed their projections and said that now there'll be 92 million American workers who will be displaced over the next 5 years. So that's 56% of American workers. These are huge numbers. The population of the United States is about 4 to 5% of the world population. So as a first approximation to count for the world as a whole, we can increase it by an order of magnitude. So tens of millions of Americans are at the risk of losing their jobs because of AI over the next 5 years, hundreds of millions of people across the world. And my expectation is that all of us in this room know. In fact, many of us might be worried about our own jobs. Yet, there is very little that's being done about it. I don't see a lot of movement from private industry trying to address it. I don't see a lot of movement from governments across the world trying to address it. This is going to be a huge social, economic, potentially political problem. Now, responsible AI requires that we do something about it. But what? So we posit that we can use AI to fight the results of AI in displacing workers. We posit that we can use AI at very large scales for reskilling and upskilling, for workforce development, both entry and re-entry. So clearly we are talking here about adult learners. And clearly we are also going to talk about adult learners who cannot move to schools of education like Georgia Tech because of age or health or family or jobs. So we must take education to them. We're talking about online learning. So these are non-traditional students with non-traditional methods of learning, and that's our audience. So at AILO, at the National AI Institute for Adult Learning and Online Education that Zach briefly introduced, our vision, our long-term vision is that we can use AI to enhance the proficiency of adult learning and online education, using in-person education as a benchmark. Now, some of my colleagues think that they can do better than in-person. For the time being, we'll just leave it as a benchmark. And our day-to-day mission is to conduct responsible research into AI that's grounded in theories of cognition and learning, because that's who we are. We are cognitive scientists, we are learning scientists, and derived from the scientific methodology of learning engineering, and I assume that many of you are familiar with it. All right, so that's the problem. A huge problem, a new problem, a problem that has arisen over the last decade or so. It wasn't there at the turn of the century. Now, to get into the ideas, because ideas have an origin, I want to flash back. So this is like a movie script. I'm going to flash back, I'm going to flash forward. So in 2014, Georgia Tech started an online Masters of Science in Computer Science program. It's now the world's largest online program in computer science, and one of the subjects it teaches is AI. At present, there are about 19,000 students. When it started in 2014, it started with just 200 students. The median age is about low to mid-30s. The age distribution is 25 to 70 years old, so definitely non-traditional students. There are a large number of students there in that program who are interested in upskilling. They are computer scientists. They often work in the software industry, but they want to learn what the current state of the art is. There are a large number of students who are interested in reskilling. Their background might be in, say, history or philosophy or architecture, and they are now trying to do a master's in computer science so that for career trajectory change. So either career advancement or career change. Perfect example of reskilling, upskilling, workforce development. So that year in 2014, David Joyner and I started a class on AI. David at that time was completing his PhD with me. Now he's the executive director of MSCS and a lot of other titles that I'll not get into right now. And one of the things we did was to conduct a quasi-experimental study. Because when Georgia Tech gives a degree of OMSCS, it doesn't say anything online. It simply says Masters in Computer Science. So the claim is that the quality of learning in this online program is on par with our residential program. So we did a quasi-experimental study where we were teaching one section online, the other section in person, same class, same instructors, same graders, same assignments, same assessments, same as much as we could make it. And the graders were doing blind grading in the sense they did not know that this exam or this assignment or this project was coming from the online section or from the in-person section. And we found that the online section students did as well. In fact, in some cases, better than the in-person section. Now, this is not a controlled study, and therefore there can be a number of factors why that happened, but at least there was some existence proof that in principle anyway, online education can be as effective as in-person education, at least as measured by our assessments. This was in 2014, way before ChatGPT and OpenAI. But there was another problem that occurred. Students were asking questions on the online discussion forum, and the TAs and I were overwhelmed by the number of questions they were asking. 2,000 questions over a semester, and who has the time to answer 2,000 questions? So I had access to IBM's Watson platform at that time. We were AI researchers teaching a class in AI, so we thought, why can't we find an AI solution to it? So we constructed Jill Watson. The Watson name comes from IBM's Watson platform. And we introduced Jill as a first name because we introduced Jill Watson as a TA in that class. And there was a bit of deception here. IRB approved, but a bit of deception here because we were thinking of that as a micro Turing test. We did not tell the students that Jill Watson was an AI TA. And students could not figure out at the end of the semester, until the end of the semester, that Jill Watson was in fact an AI TA. Now, at that time, Jill Watson answered questions solely based on the class syllabus, because, of course, no one reads syllabi, we know that. And so it answered only some of the questions that students were asking, but it gave students access to an AI TA anytime, any place, and it saved me and the TA team time. So then it occurred to us, if a small group of researchers can do it, start an online program, teach a class in AI, show that it's as effective as in-person class, and use AI to teach AI, why cannot we do it at scale? So now to 2021, I'm forwarding ahead by several years. And so at that point in 2021, US National Science Foundation gave us a fairly good-sized grant to start this National AI Institute for Adult Learning and Online Education. Now that has many partners in it. I'll not go to all the universities, all the partners, but they are universities and industrial partners, they are nonprofit organizations. This is what the membership looks like. I'll not go through all the members, but there are about 60 to 70 members of AILO right now, and it's a very interdisciplinary group. Computer scientists, cognitive scientists, learning scientists, education scientists. We even have philosophers interested in ethics of AI. Now we began, this is all from the proposal we wrote for NSF. We began by saying that we can think of an ecosystem of online education where teachers begin by some understanding of theories of human cognition and learning, so those are the dashed lines, and some understanding of the constraints or affordances of online learning environments, again a dashed line. Teachers teach, learners learn, and we thought that because this is online education, every learning activity will leave a digital footprint, that we could capture the digital footprint. And if we could capture the digital footprint, then we could do feedback into to teachers, to learners, as well to AI assistants like Jill Watson that we were building for teachers and learners. So this then became an information feedback loop. Information feedback loops have been in learning and education forever. But the interesting thing here is that there are AI assistants helping teachers and learners, and we are collecting large-scale data in the hope of improving both teaching and learning. We also needed a second teaching context, learning context. So we went to the Technical College System of Georgia. There are 22 two-year-old colleges, two-year colleges, about 300,000 students, median age is 26, so again, non-traditional students, and many of them are in their 40s or beyond. It's open admissions, very diverse population, and they teach occupational skills like nursing, management, cybersecurity. I'll get into some of that a little bit later. And we began with 3 top-level theories, theories of learning. Now, a theoretical framework has theories at many levels of abstraction. I'm right now giving you only the top-level theories. Individual projects are based on more specific theories. So first, we said that in online education, almost all learning is passive. People watch videos after videos after videos. Can we not make it active? And so this is coming from Mickey Chi's theories of ICAP, from passive to active to constructive to interactive, and I'll not get into constructive interactive just yet. Another theory was the theory of Garrison et al., who have looked at online education and identified 3 major problems. There is lack of teaching presence. Students don't sense that they have access to teachers. There's lack of cognitive presence. Students don't sense that there is cognitive engagement because they're just watching videos. And there's a lack of social presence. You have asynchronous learning going on among geographically distributed learners, maybe 800 persons in a class distributed all across the world who don't know each other. But learning is not only a cognitive process, it's also a social process. How is learning even possible without some sense of social belonging? And of course, many people here know about Bloom's 2 sigma effect, which very briefly says that one-to-one tutoring can lead to 2 standard deviations improvement over the mean over tutoring a large class. Now, the Bloom's 2 sigma effect has not been reproduced very often. Kurt Van Leyen in 2012 said that maybe instead of 2 sigma effect, the community should just be aiming for 1 sigma. Even 1 standard deviation is a huge change if we can achieve it. So that led us to 4 research thrusts: AI agents for learning and teaching, personalization of learning at scale, human-AI interaction, because if humans cannot interact with AI very easily, they'll not use it. And then a data architecture for learning, for realizing the capture of all of that data and feeding that data back to teachers and learners and AI assistants. And we use the methodology of learning design, learning engineering. This particular slide, I think, originates from CMU Learn Lab. But the basic idea is that you start with theories of learning that leads to technologies, you deploy them, you collect large amounts of data, and then you feed it back into your tools. And this is a process of continual sustained improvement. All right. So I hope I've given you a sense of the problem we are trying to address and the scale of the problem, and a sense of where we began in 2021, what approach we thought we could take. Because how do you even begin with thinking about helping tens of millions of American workers or hundreds of millions of workers across the world, adult learners, reskill and upskill through online education? There has to be a starting point. So now, fast forward, we're now in 2026. So one of my colleagues, my late colleague, Ruth Canfor, and her students, Sibylle Nedgard and Rebecca Story, developed the ecosystem of adult learning. So the top lines are theirs, and they define 3 kinds of learning: micro-learning, meso-learning, macro-learning. In micro-learning, a student or a learner is dealing with a single AI tool. The learning occurs over seconds or minutes or hours, not much more than that, and there is one data source. In meso-learning, a student might be dealing with learning over a semester or more, and now it's not just cognitive and metacognitive processes, but social, emotional, motivational factors that become very important. You may have multiple data sources. How do you account for those multiple data sources? And then macro learning, which might be occurring over lifetime, when you may have employment records and educational records, and now age, family, work become critical. Now you are dealing with a very large number of AI tools, a very large number of data sources. How do you use all of that data? So over the last 5 years, we have built 7 AI technologies. These technologies cover a very large number of skills: apprentice tutor, mathematical skills; ITEL, reading and comprehension skills; IV, skill learning from interactive videos; Jill Watson, I mentioned briefly to you; SAMI for social belonging, because social presence was one of the things that Garrison et al. Had identified as a problem in online learning; SMART for concept learning, so this is learning through concept maps; and VERA for model learning, learning about models of open systems. Each theory has each tool, each technology is based on its own specific theory and theory of change. And now, my colleague Ruth also put them in the spectrum of cognitive teaching, social presence, and micro-macro learning. And so we are trying to cover a range of these. We also built a data architecture for AI augmented learning that we call A4L. From the left-hand side, we automatically ingest data from all of these tools and from multiple data sources that I'll get into. And we want to support not just microlearning, which is, again, unfolding over seconds or minutes or hours, but meso-learning and potentially macro-learning. We are not at the level of macro-learning where we are collecting data across a lifetime. I'll get into more about the data architecture a little bit later. Now, one thing we have found is that when we were working on these problems, we came across many problems for which AI did not have a solution. So organically, we identified problems that AI could and should solve. Some of those problems are machine teaching, metacognition and AI agents, mutual theory of mind, and I'll get into at least some of them, mutual theory of mind in particular, a little bit later. So it's not just a question that there is some AI technology, there are some problems in learning and education, and we can use these AI technologies to rethink, reimagine learning and education. But also problems in learning and education inspire us to think in terms of new AI paradigms and metaphors. All right, so I'm about 40% into my talk at this particular point, and I'm going to now talk about a few results. Apprentice Tutor, we deployed it in a class on drug calculation in an associate degree program at nursing at the Technical College System of Georgia. About 20 to 25% of students in this typically do not pass the class on drug calculation and get out of the program. Since we have started using Apprentice Tutor, the completion rate is 100%. Now, this is just one college. It turns out there are tens of thousands of associate degree programs across the United States. So imagine what might happen if we were to deploy it across the country. SMART, the system that enables concept learning. So this connects with quality of learning and with personalization. So Bloom's 2 sigma effect is typically very difficult to reproduce, but SMART has resulted in 1 standard deviation improvement in academic performance in core classes at TCSG. Now this is for a population where many students do not come with high school diplomas. They earn the equivalent of high school diploma on the way. And Jill Watson, we have evidence now that Jill Watson fosters critical thinking, higher order thinking. Now Jill Watson uses ChatGPT as the backend, and I'll get into how Jill Watson differs from ChatGPT. Now, what does it mean to say that Jill Watson fosters higher order thinking? How do we know that? So we used Google's BERT model to train an agent, a classification agent, on publicly available data sets. So they're publicly available data sets of questions in the Bloom's taxonomy. On the left side are lower order questions and higher order questions. Lower order questions are about memory recall. Higher order questions are about analysis or synthesis or evaluation. Now, in a typical in-person class, the literature says about 10 to 20% of the questions tend to be higher order in Bloom's taxonomy. Most of the questions the students ask in in-person classes are of low order. We collected questions that students were asking about 5,500 questions from Georgia Tech classes, from TCSG classes, from classes in AI, from classes in English. This is over a longitudinal study over a period of time. And as we did that, we found that the number of higher order questions ranged from about 22% to about 50%. This is in the rightmost column. Now, this result flies in the face of a lot of other results that are getting reported in the literature. I'm sure you have come across studies which say, well, AI is going to reduce the need for critical thinking or higher order thinking. AI is going to make our students cognitively lazy and so on and so forth. That's not the evidence we are finding. And I'll give you more evidence a little bit when we come to another technology called Ivy. So now the question becomes why? Why is it that we are getting different results? I'm not sure I have a full answer, but I'll give you two hypotheses. One is it depends on the learning context. Like I mentioned, many of these technologies have been used in the OMSCS program, where many of the students tend to be more mature. But I think an even more important reason is that these technologies, the Apprentice Tutor, Smart, Jill Watson, all of the technologies that we have work really well when these technologies are used in conjunction with good instructional design. So AI technologies by themselves are not necessarily the answer. The reason they work well is because the teacher is changing his or her class, his or her instructional materials, his or her assignments, his or her assessment methods that encourage foster critical thinking. So AI can help it, but AI by itself will not do it. If you just take AI technology and give it to students and say, use it, that's not enough. So we have now teaching fellows who help co-design these technologies. Since this study was done on critical thinking about 2-3 years back, we have moved on to a multimodal version of Jill Watson. Let me give you the motivation for this multimodal version. So we know that multimedia learning is typically very useful from the perspective of cognition. We have known this for about 30 years in the community. Richard Meyer's work on cognitive theory of multimedia learning is very, very well known. And there are a very large number of classes in STEM education in particular which use diagrams. But ChatGPT deals only with text, not with diagrams. We wanted to see whether we could make ChatGPT deal with images. And we also wanted to see whether we could make a ChatGPT more trustworthy and enhance cognitive engagement, which was one of the problems in cognitive inquiry framework of Garrison et al., that there wasn't enough cognitive engagement in online learning. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit more, but what I want you to take away from here is that industry is offering us access to all of these LLMs, ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, Claude, and so on and so forth. But we don't have to just use them as they are. They are the infrastructure. But we as learning and educational scientists can build architectures on top of it that abide by theories of the cognition and learning. ChatGPT doesn't. So this is how Jill Watson works on top of ChatGPT. It uses the typical reason and react methodology. So it does a lot of reasoning on top of ChatGPT. What I want to point out to you is that as it is doing this reasoning, it asks ChatGPT, it prompts ChatGPT, it changes the prompt to ChatGPT to adhere by Meyer's principles of multimedia learning. Now, one could ask the question, well, what's new about it? There are, after all, multimodal LLMs available now, Google's Gemini, for example. And so far as I know, there is no publicly available evidence that suggests that any of these LLMs are based on theories of cognition and learning. If they are, then I want to learn about it. But we as educators know that these things need to be based on theories of cognition and learning, otherwise the teaching and learning will not be as effective as we want it to be. And then second, we do not necessarily have to use all the tools that industry is providing as they are. What we tend to do, many of us, including myself at times, is to just take ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or some other LLM and give it to the students. But that's not necessarily a very effective project. AI has so much more to offer to learning and education than just LLMs. LLMs are just the infrastructure. We have to build architectures on top of it. Now, when we, through randomized controlled trials, what we found is that Jill Watson, this multimodal version of Jill Watson, increases cognitive engagement, increases learning and retention, and increases trust. Now, I'll not get into all the details here. What I will point out is that, in fact, I'm going to go one slide forward, and then I'll go back, that there is a talk by Karan Taneja, who has just written his PhD dissertation on this particular topic, so this is mostly his work, and this talk is on July 1st, so if you want more technical details, he'll be a great person to talk to. But that brings me to what is the difference between Jill Watson and LLMs? Well, first, Jill Watson works with only instructor-approved materials. So you go to a website, you deposit, if you're an instructor of any class at any level, you deposit all the materials that you're interested in. On the end of the website, out pops a Jill Watson on your favorite LMS system. Now you can use it in your class. Your students can use it. Design of Jill Watson is based on theories of cognition and learning. Jill Watson shows few hallucinations and little toxicity. We have conducted empirical studies comparing it with, for example, OpenAI's AI assistant, and I can assure you Jill Watson performs across a variety of measures much better. Talk to Karan Taneja about it. And all responses from Jill Watson, whether image or text, can be clicked so that it will show you where that text or image is originating from. There is easy verifiability, which improves trust. And I think as learning and educators, these are the kind of things we want. So we don't necessarily have to take everything that industry is offering in its raw value, in its raw form. We can do better. Okay, but Jill Watson is based solely on generative AI. For the last 50 years, this community has been doing a lot of work on classical AI-based tutoring systems. Intelligent tutoring systems are a great example of it. Some of the leaders of that community are in the hall today. What happens to all of that? Well, we are taking the position that at AILO, that the future belongs to a synthesis between knowledge-based AI, classical AI, and generative AI. And I'll show you an example of that. So in online education, there is a lot of emphasis on videos. And these videos are passive consumption. There is no interaction with you. You can't ask a question. And they are generic AI coaches like Jill Watson that can answer some questions. So we built on the side of these videos coaches that have a deep understanding of the skills being taught. Now, the skills we are talking here are AI skills like partial order planning and inductive decision tree learning, but in principle, it could be any tree, any skill, like making omelets out of eggs. Now, we capture deep understanding of that through knowledge representations that we call task method knowledge models, and these models capture the causality across these steps. So it's no longer a recipe like in a cookbook. It is an causal explanation for why the ordering these steps, why one step creates the preconditions for the next step to occur, and so on. And when we deploy them in real settings, then what we find is that IV answers even more higher order critical questions, because now there is a deep understanding. And we need this deep understanding because part of the goal of learning and education, especially for adult learners, is adaptive expertise. Adaptive expertise is the idea that we can learn skills, but the true test remains whether we can transfer the skills to new conditions, new situations, new contexts. That's the goal of a lot of learning and education. But in order for that transfer to occur, we know from half a century of learning sciences and educational sciences work, you need deep causal understanding. And that classical AI can provide. Again, instructional design is very important because when instructional design is done well and we have assignments based on it, then the number of higher order critical questions increases even more from 41% to 69%. But there is a problem. In classical AI, one question has been, in intelligent tutoring systems, one question has been, where does all of this knowledge come from? And here we are developing text-to-model techniques. So you can think of this as System 1 and System 2 thinking coming together. System 1 from Daniel Kahneman and other cognitive scientists' work is, which is fast, intuitive, automatic, and I'm going to put right now Gen AI in that column. And System 2 is slow, deliberative, conscious, and I'm going to put that in the System 2 column. So classical AI in the System 2 column. So System 2 works very well. We know from half a century of work in this community, but the question is, where does that knowledge come from? And we have built techniques that acquire that knowledge semi-automatically from LLMs. So that's shown in the bottom right, where you have instructional text that results in the acquisition of models directly from instructional text. Again, I'll not go to the details, but there is a paper by Rahul Das that he'll be presenting a little bit later on Wednesday, July 1st. So you should, if you want, go to him and talk to him. A few results from a data architecture. So Georgia Tech has agreed to share with us some data from LMS, Learning Management System, some data from SIS, this is Student Information System, and most of the time, most universities don't share that data because of reasons of data privacy. So there are huge issues of data governance and data policy, and that data governance and data policies are being provided by Georgia Tech. But we take all of this data, we put it in a standardized form. The standardized form is coming from our colleagues at One Ed Tech. It's called Caliper Analytics. Why put it in a standardized form? Because we want all of these tools, the 7 tools that we have built, to use the same data. So if Jill Watson creates some data, we want it to be available to Smart or Apprentice Tutor or SAMI. But that means that all of this data has to be in the same standardized form. So it's not just a question of using that data for instructors and learners. We want it to be useful for all the AI tools. So the emerging metaphor is of a community of AI tools which are collaborating together in support of teaching and learning. So on the top right, an instructor in the purple box may begin with some instructional materials. Students engage with that, and the AI agents, the data architecture, A for L data architecture, is processing all of that interactions and LMS data and SIS data, presenting information about the instructor, and then embedded inside these visualization dashboards are other AI agents who inform the teacher that an intervention is needed, because a teacher does not have the time to go through 800 visualizations. And the instructor may ask additional questions, and the cycle repeats. The agent processes more information and suggests to teacher how the intervention might be needed. So this is human-in-the-loop personalization. So now we have access to a large amount of data in a very high-dimensional data space. And that means that we can now start asking questions that we could not ask earlier. So for example, do students who ask questions of Jill Watson early are more likely to submit on-time submissions? So now we can do correlation analysis, and with that comes predictive analytics and diagnostic analytics. I'll give you one early result. This result is not reflective of the true power of this data architecture. I picked this result more because it is reflective of the problem we are dealing with adult learners. It turns out that older adults, this was a surprising result for us, that older adults tend to ask more questions of Jill Watson than younger adults. Why? We are not sure. And insofar as I know, results like this have been rarely reported in the literature. If you know of literature on that, I'd love to hear from it. So these are the kind of correlations that we can certainly do, and this is important because it's not a question that we can take conversational AI agents and plop it in a class. But it is that we'll have to build different architectures on top of the infrastructure these conversational agents are offering for different contexts, for different users, for different cultures. Junsu Park has given a series of talks at this Festival of Learning. Yesterday he gave another talk. So if Junsu is here, so please talk with him more about this. I'll go to foundational AI very briefly. So I mentioned that it's not just a question of using AI to reframe, reimagine problems in learning and education. The cycle goes in the other direction too. So I'm going to talk about mutual theory of mind very briefly. So theory of mind is the human ability to ascribe mental states to other humans as well as to oneself. So I could say, for example, that you are right now paying attention. So I'm ascribing a mental state to you. You could say, for example, similarly, that I'm thinking about what I'm going to say next. You can ascribe a mental state to me. Anthropologists tell us the theory of mind is the basis of much of human-to-human communication. But we want more than human-to-human communication. We want human-to-human and human-to-AI collaboration, not just communication. And that requires mutual theory of mind. Mutual theory of mind is a second-order reciprocal theory where I have a theory of your theory of my mind. And this happens in learning all the time. Learning is ultimately about building a theory of mind to student. As a teacher, I'm always trying to build a theory of mind of each student. What does he or she know? What does he or she does not know? So you can imagine here on the left-hand side, the AI says, this student is confused about concept A, and the student and offers some resources. And the student says that, there should be, okay. The student says, the AI thinks I'm confused about concept A, but actually I'm confused about A and B, both. So notice the student is building a theory of mind of the AI's theory of the student's mind. This is the work of Chelsea Wang, who did her PhD at Georgia Tech 2 years back. She's now a postdoc at CMU, and soon she'll be a faculty member at University of California at Berkeley. So she identified 3 stages that are critical for this, realizing this human-to-AI collaboration. AI constructs its understanding, student recognizes the AI's understanding, AI revises its understanding. But how do we actually realize it in a computational form? So we thought that maybe the AI can have a theory of its own mind and use theory of its own mind to revise its understanding. So this is how it works. This is in the context of SAMI, about which I've talked briefly. SAMI reads posts on an online discussion forum about students, analyzes them, then connects students based on its mental model of all the students. But SAMI makes mistakes because of hallucinations from ChatGPT and other LLMs. So now on the right-hand figure, I know there is a lot going on there, so let's explain it. So at the bottom of the right-hand side figure, SAMI is just processing introductory posts and making connections. So a student may say, I was born in Seoul, I've lived all across the world, right now I spend a lot of time in Atlanta. And SAMI may incorrectly infer that the student lives in Seoul. So it will connect others with students who also live in the same time zone. Now the student says, no, I don't live in Seoul, I was born there, I live in Atlanta. So SAMI uses its theory of its own mind to introspect, revise its knowledge about the student, and thereby make the connection more seamless. This is not a complete instantiation of a mutual theory of mind, but I hope you can see where we are going there. And this last part is the work of Jisoo Kim, a master's student at my lab. So at the current time, we are building summary synthesis lessons of all the work that we have done over the last 5 years. The first one on guidelines for designing AI tools for adult learning has just been published by my colleague Chris McClellan and his students, Jennifer Reddick and Glenn Smith. There are a large number of authors in this paper because this was the kind of paper that you write when you have a large cohort of colleagues. We are also building this community of agents where one agent can use data created by another agent, as well as data from SIS and LMS. Let me just very briefly talk about impacts. Since 2021, at least 50,000 students have used our tools, at least one tool. Now, this 50,000 tool is a much smaller number than tens of millions we were talking about, but it's a drop, or it's a dot in the right direction. And this year, Georgia Tech has decided to offer Jill Watson to all of its classes. So this summer, we are introducing it in 6 classes. If this experiment works, in fall, we'll introduce it in 60 classes, and next spring, we'll introduce it in 600 classes. And this sort of makes me super excited, and it also makes me super anxious. I'm going to conclude by two things. AI and education, research on AI education started about 50 years back. I think the first papers are around 73 or 74. In 50 years, we have made a lot of progress. But in 1970s, AI was a promise with a very small community, mostly scattered in academic research groups. Today, AI is a fact of life. It's a huge success, and that success has created new problems. And one of the biggest problems is that it's disrupting skills and displacing workers. And so responsible AI now has, I think, if I might be bold enough, to say a historical imperative. We have to address this problem. We don't have a choice. I don't see industry solving it. I don't see government solving it. It'll be scientific communities like ours that will solve it. And scientific communities like ours that represented this festival of learning have the right kind of skills, the interdisciplinary backgrounds, the technology, the AI. Let's do it. I want to thank all of my colleagues at AILO, at the Design Intelligence Lab, at Georgia Tech, and thank you to the US National Science Foundation for its support. Thank you.
That was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much, Ashok. We'll take questions now. Got Ken right there. Oh, we have a mic runner on the way. Leave your hand raised.
Let me ask my question.
Ashok, that was great. I especially like the System 1, System 2 connection. I think that's very relevant these days. We need more slow thinking in our systems and our research. Along those lines, have been reflecting, you mentioned ICAP, and I have an alternative suggestion for you, because the passive-active part of that is super important, but ICAP was developed for face-to-face instruction, and Mickey Chi explicitly says it's not about feedback. But one of the most powerful things interactive AI systems can do is provide feedback. So I wonder, did you consider theories, for example, of deliberate practice that really emphasize not just feedback? The other thing is well-tailored tasks, so task design that are getting at the fundamental hidden skills that students are struggling to learn that we might not have previously identified.
It's a great point. Thank you for raising it. So I did not have the time to go through all 7 of those technologies, but SMART, for example, is a technology that provides feedback. So you begin with the text, and a student constructs a concept model out of it, and it's compared to an expert concept model, and then SMART provides feedback. Apprentice tutor, in fact, is based on the notions of deliberative practice. So among the various technologies that were discussed, feedback and deliberative practice is in fact covered by some of them. But there is, of course, as you know, a range of problems to be solved. So for example, Vera deals with very open-ended problems. What would happen to Georgia's sea turtles as the temperature of water goes about 1 degree? That's the kind of problem where it's not clear there is one correct solution or what the correct solution is or what an expert model of problem solving is. So different tools are dealing with different theories, but I see your point completely.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions. I will just ask one. One is, it feels somewhat paradoxical. I don't think it's a real contradiction, but it feels somewhat paradoxical that we're looking towards AI in our search for solutions to this de-skilling problem. Like, we are trying to train workers to do things that AI could not do, and yet we're using AI to do so. So if you formulate the problem that way, it sounds very intractable and like we're on the wrong path. I don't actually believe that, but I'd be interested in hearing your vision, for example, how AI might be helpful in sort of professions that have more soft skills, like nursing was actually one of your examples. Yeah. So we don't want AI to do all the nursing work, presumably. What are the strengths of AI in helping people learn the sort of special social skills that are involved?
So that's a great point, but that, again, the kind of question you're raising leads to a conundrum. So SAMI, for example, helps students build social connections. So it might say, hey, you live in Sydney, Australia, and you have children who go to elementary school, and here is another classmate who lives in Chicago, but she also has children going to elementary school. You may have similar time management problems. Let me connect you. Or you are a military veteran in one country, and you're a military veteran in another country, but let me connect you. And this notion of shared identity goes a very long way towards people feeling, hey, if he or she can do it, I can do it too. But there is a conundrum there. If SAMI is going to do all the work of connecting people, then are people going to lose social skills over time? Because for me to make a connection with you requires some social skill to be able to go to you, to talk to you in a nice manner so that I can build a connection with you. So you're right, there are very tough issues to be addressed here. I'm less worried about using AI to fight back against the influence of AI in terms of displacing workers and disrupting skills, because we want to use every tool, every weapon we have available to us. And I'm going to say that the time to do that is now. 10 years back, it was perhaps too early. 10 years later from now, if the World Economic Forum's projections are right, it might be too late. This is the time to use every weapon we have, and AI is one strong weapon.
I saw a hand over there next to the camera.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting talk and very interesting to see also from the perspective of computer science all the advances that you're making. I have a very short question. Do you believe that in the last, especially 2 years, AI has reached this blue 2 sigma compared to traditional learning?
My understanding of the literature is that AI has made significant improvements in the quality of learning, but not up to 2 sigma. So for example, the Khan Academy with the Khan Amigo tutor is reporting of the order of 0.4 to 0.8 standard deviations improvement. Their problem is not so much of improvement in terms of scores of learning, but the rate of adoption. But I know of very few studies which have received as much as 2 standard deviation. And my understanding is that in a general community, we now recognize that 2 sigma effect will probably be very difficult to reproduce, if possible at all. It will require some very specific context with very specific learners where we might see those kind of effects.
If I may, as a follow-up quickly. So you think we miss the context, like we miss the proper resources to achieve the 2 sigma?
No, I did not say it well, so let me try it again. I think in general, achieving 2 sigma improvement is going to be very, very difficult. When it happens, it will be for very specific circumstances, and those results will be perhaps not very generalizable. As a community, I would suggest going for 1 sigma effect itself will be a huge achievement. And we don't want to diminish the importance of 1 sigma effect. Assume for a second that the entire population of the United States or South Korea or the world were to improve its scores by 1 sigma effect. That's going to be a huge change. It's going to be a dramatic change. Even 0.5 sigma will be very important. So we don't necessarily have to worry about Bloom's claims about 2 sigma. 0.5 would be great. 1 sigma would be great.
I'm Mladen from Monash University here. Thanks, Ashok, for the great presentation and for showcasing such a fascinating work that you and your colleagues have done over the past years. I just had a quick question about how do you envision your work contributing to the refinement of learning theories that we have been using so far, as in this new context of learning where students collaboratively learn with generative AI agents, for example, they are now getting the ready products of learning, right? For which they would originally put some more time, some more effort following the principles of learning, etc. But now the environment, the setting is completely different. And to be able to efficiently use AI, including generative AI, to support students' upskilling and reskilling and so on, maybe we might also need to think about modifying the theories that we are using so far, because there may be some new constructs in these theories that we haven't accounted for before, such as, for example, the principle of maybe evaluating the product generated by generative AI, right, that we haven't accounted for. So yeah, just curious, how do you see your work as it unfolds contributing to the refinement of the theories?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Another great question. Thank you for asking it. Indeed, we have an opportunity of contributing to theories of learning. I'll take a different example. So one of the 7 tools that we have built called Vera for Virtual Experimental Research Assistant supports inquiry-based learning, which is a major theory of learning. But inquiry-based learning, historically in AI in education, has not had the success that people envisioned in the 1990s. So work by Barbara White, for example, or Christina Schwartz has had some success, but not quite the success we wanted, because inquiry-based learning is very hard. Students don't have the domain knowledge, and they don't have the meta-modeling knowledge to be able to do inquiry-based learning. But now in comes AI, and especially generative AI. One of the difficulties has been as students conduct various actions of modeling, it's very difficult for the AI agent to interpret those modeling interactions. But now we can use generative AI, which is what we are trying to do in our lab, to interpret those interactions and to provide very fine-grained support and scaffolding. That is a way in which we can take the existing theories of inquiry-based modeling and refine them further. So I totally agree with you. What will come out of this will be not just new AI technologies and how we use them in learning and education, but what will come out of it, I hope, I think, will also be new theories of AI, or at least more refined theories of AI, of learning and education.
Thank you so much for the impressive talk. So I'm Han Jing from Lehigh University. As a HSI researcher, I have a question about how the AI designs in education should differ from generally the human-centered AI. As we can see, the education is more like naturally hierarchical, so teachers will be great students, set policies, but students may not have the real freedoms to challenge how the AI interprets their learning data. So in these type of situations, what should be the human-centered or even the learner-centered will be? Thank you.
Yeah, so these are really good questions. So I'm going to come at it from a slightly different perspective, but I'll connect with what you're saying. So I'm going to go back to the example of SAMI. Recall, please, SAMI is one of the technologies we have developed. SAMI interprets the posts that students made on Ed Discussion Forum, builds a model of each one of them, represents them as a knowledge graph, matches the graphs, and connects people based on the notion of shared identity. That works really well. Students seem to like it. Many students use it, but there is also a problem. Students lose agency, which is a very human-centered computing notion. By delegating many tasks to computers, students are losing not just the skills of building social connections, but the notion of human agency. They want to remain in control of whom they want to befriend. And here they are delegating it, we are delegating it, or we are promoting the delegation of the responsibility to AIs. So that works well for learning and education in this particular context that we are dealing with, but has huge problems, questions for human-centered computing. So I totally agree with you. I think what is working in one situation may not necessarily transfer in all situations. In this situation, however, students say that they are willing to lose some of the agency. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Students say, there's also a question of data privacy. We're looking at their posts and using those posts to connect them. But students say their need for social belonging is so large that they're willing to trade off some issues of privacy, data privacy, and agency for doing that. But this is particularly in this context of learning and education. I don't know whether it is the right policy in all contexts of human-centered computing.
Thank you for this great talk. Really appreciate it. I wanted to, when I think of reskilling and upskilling, I think of the 90s and the North American Free Trade Agreement. A huge number of jobs left the United States and went to other countries. And we had the same situation, disruption of jobs, need for reskilling, need for upskilling. There was a lot of talk about technology being able to do that, but in the end it never happened due to various reasons. And one part of that is a large population is their unfamiliarity with any kind of technology or ability to use it. So are there any learnings from there that you can incorporate into what you're proposing, and what is it that we can do better this time around?
So that's a really good question, too. Certainly, there are huge forces at play here, not just technological forces, but ultimately technology is situated in economy and culture. We cannot just talk about technology. We have to find solutions from a socio-technical system perspective, where technology will be one part of the solution, but economy, culture, they will all play roles. The NAFTA agreement, for example, was an economic agreement, not a technological agreement necessarily. So I certainly agree with that. But there is also another danger. We could also say that, and I think this is what is happening right now. We could also say, hey, the problem is so big, I can't do anything about it, and therefore we don't do anything about it. So within this particular hall, for example, I suspect that many of us are concerned about our own jobs or jobs of our family members or friends. We see this tsunami coming, and we are in thrall of that, in dread of that, afraid of that, but we also feel that we have no control over it, so we don't do anything. And what I'm suggesting is that, yes, indeed, there are social, economic, political, cultural forces at play here about which I cannot do anything. But AI is one part of that mix. Technology is one part of that mix. And this community is the right community. If not us, who will do it? The technology side of it. We are uniquely qualified, this community, to do that. Now, ultimately, this will have to be combined with economic and cultural forces, so I certainly agree with you on that part.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the great talk. I noticed that you mentioned basically a correlation between the students' early use of the AI tool and their submission times for assignments. I'm curious if you could speak more about like the prior skills that students may have coming into the online context in terms of their study skills or time management skills, and how the degree of skill in those areas impacts the success with AI tools.
So, good question. Thank you for raising it. Before I answer that question, let me make one other point. Notice that we started with three theories of ICAP, McKichie's ICAP theory, Garrison et al.'s commutative inquiry, and Bloom's two sigma effect. Another theory that we could have started with is that of time management. So many people think that time management is the central problem for adult learners. And if had we started with that theory, had we started with that hypothesis, that would have led us to construction of a different set of tools. So first, I just want to acknowledge it. There is nothing sacrosanct about the hypothesis that we started with. I can easily imagine another team starting with a different set of hypotheses and leading to different tools, which is why we need an entire community, because one person or one institute is not enough given the scale of the problem. But you're indeed right. The time management skills that students bring to it and their prior knowledge, not just skills of time management, but their prior knowledge, play a huge role in their learning experiences. We are not addressing in our institute, but I acknowledge its importance.
Very informative talk and discussion. Thank you. My question is, what new competency or skills or knowledge do instructional designers need to create tools like Sammy and Jill Watson to work effectively with faculty navigating this new AI for reskilling and upskilling? Thank you.
It's a good question. And this is a critical question because for these AI technologies to succeed, we will need very close collaboration with instructional designers, and we need new kind of instructional designs. Given the current instructional designs, it's unlikely these AI technologies will achieve the purpose that we want to achieve. I think at least basic AI literacy is needed, but much more than that. So we are working with a number of teaching fellows at Technical College System of Georgia. It is not so much that they need a particular skill as much as they need a particular disposition. So there are many teachers at TCSG who are not very inclined to work with us because we come from an AI background and they feel that we might be instrumental in disrupting their skills. So I think it's disposition that is much more important than specific disposition is also part of competency rather than specific skills. And once you have the kind of disposition where you're willing to work with AI, then that changes everything because you can acquire the skills and other competencies.
Maybe one more question. We'll go for this region over here.
Hi, this is Tushar from Khan Academy. Thank you for the very informative talk. You mentioned that we should treat AI as infrastructure and build our systems on top of that. We've been doing that over the last year. We've seen good improvements in cognitive engagement and other metrics, which we'll be talking about this afternoon. But we haven't seen that kind of inflection point like we've seen in coding agents, for instance, right? So I'm wondering, like, how much of this is because the foundation models have to be improved for learning versus us, trying to build systems on top of it. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So I'm familiar with some work by Khan Academy, and thank you for doing the work, great work. So really appreciate what you do at Khan Academy. Having said that, I also think that, let me put this in a question form rather than an assertion form. I wonder whether we have become too enamored of generative AI, and we are all putting all of our bets on generative AI. Now, as powerful as generative AI is, we also have 50 years of experience using knowledge-based classical AI, which has succeeded very well. For example, in intelligent tutoring system, for example, using deliberative practice as a learning methodology. And so one way in which I think we might get closer to the inflection point that you're looking for, or that we are all looking for, I'm looking for the same thing, is if we can use the two in conjunction with one another. And one way of doing that is that in knowledge-based AI, there has been a huge problem for 50 years. In intelligent tutoring systems all have the same problem. How do you engineer the knowledge? How do you craft the knowledge? So instead of thinking of using generative AI LLMs and just putting them in the class, can we start thinking, not against that, I think that has its value, but can we start thinking also in terms of how we can use generative AI in different ways, for example, by crafting the knowledge that knowledge-based learning agents need. So that might be one way in which we can accelerate the process towards the inflection point.
Ashok will join a Chatbots session in half an hour, and so if you have remaining questions, some of that panel can be used to have follow-up questions. You can also approach him, but let's please thank Ashok one more time. All right, hello everybody. Thanks for joining the panel here on Chatbots. Discussing the future of conversational AI agents in education. So it's question mark, exclamation mark, because we want to cover the topic a little bit broadly and also engage in the controversies as well as lessons learned and ways forward. And then of course, Q&A. And I have with me two great panelists, Bryan Richardson and Ashok Goel, and we'll expand the discussion as well at the halfway mark to incorporate audience discussion and some audience plants that we have some planned interactions with. But we're going to start with introductions before the controversies, and we'll begin with Bryan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bryan Richardson. I work at the Gates Foundation on the K-12 program. We are deeply committed to the work that you're doing as researchers in this space to try and make AI work for students, especially those least served by the world's educational systems. My work at the Gates Foundation focuses on trying to make AI models better. And so when Zach sort of brought this topic up about chatbots, I think what we're actually talking about is tutoring. We're trying to sort of understand how it is that machine learning can replicate what it is that a really good expert AI tutor does. And I want us to sort of step back for a second and really think about how difficult what it is that a tutor does is, in a very short amount of time, layers of things that are all happening together. So if you think about what a really excellent tutor does when they sit down with a student, and I'm assuming this is happening in sort of a classroom context with practice and instructional materials and things like that, where we know that the educational gains actually happen. So when a tutor sits down with a student, they know right away what that student seems to know, where they seem to be confused. They are noticing whether that student is tired or hungry or disengaged or frustrated. They have the ability to draw on lots and lots of instructional materials, and as Ken said before, lots of good worked examples. And in a matter of seconds, they're able to think about the appropriate pedagogical approach that that student needs. And they're able to do this in a matter of seconds, and they're able to sustain it for a period of a half hour to an hour at a high degree of accuracy that maintains the engagement of that student. This is an incredibly complicated and layered thing for a machine learning model or a series of machine learning models to replicate. So when we talk about chatbots, I want us to sort of have in our heads that what we're looking at with chatbots right now is just the beginning of what we ultimately want to see happen with AI tutoring generally to replicate what excellent expert humans do. So how are things going right now with AI models as it relates to tutoring? Well, one of my favorite studies of 2025, I called it my summer banger of 25 in education and research studies, was Dor Dembski and team at Stanford. They did a sort of simple thing where they looked at a series of basic benchmarks of tutoring. They looked across many different frontier models and open source models at that time, and they looked at just sort of a series of simple benchmarks, which you'll see here in sort of the gray and black striped bars. That is the baseline of what an expert human does in these different things. And it's everything from the amount of time that a student is allowed to talk, the average words per turn, the questions that come back. And as you can see, the best models are coming nowhere close to what an expert human does. And the result that many students experience is that they talk too much, they give the answers away too quickly, they don't challenge the students' thinking the way that a good tutor does. So right now, the state-of-the-art models where all of this money is doing amazing things and things like reasoning and coding, they are not accumulating to the education space right now. One of the things that we're therefore working on at the Gates Foundation is a 2030 goal that says AI models by 2030 ought to match expert human performance in 5 very specific education jobs: tutoring, grading student work, providing students feedback based on what they know, helping teachers plan instruction, and coaching teachers on how to be better teachers. We can have a debate about whether or not agreement with human expertise is the right metric, but we think it's at least a way of conceptualizing what we aspire to have happen in the next 5 years. As I talked about in the dinner last night, one of the first things that we're funding in partnership with Digital Promise, you see Jeremy here, is AI infrastructure. We're going to be funding the development of open source data sets that represent these 5 different use cases, with a huge emphasis on all the different dimensions of tutoring that you want to have, that you want to expose AI models to. We're going to be developing models, and more importantly, we're going to be developing benchmarks, ways for all of us to measure whether or not Google's doing better, whether the open source community is doing better, whether Conmigo is doing better. And what we want to see in the education sector is competition among everybody to hill climb and do better than everybody else. One of the ways that we're making these grants that we've learned over time is the only way that we actually see results happen is that we can't just fund research, we can't just fund products, we can't just give money to districts. We have to fund partnerships where all of these partners are working together as a team. So when we give a grant in this space, we're not funding one of these squares, we're funding all 4 of these squares as a partnership. And going ahead, we're hoping to include engineers and machine learning experts that can be part of this feedback loop and understand how to make the models better based on what teachers and students are seeing in real classrooms. We're making 3 bets to try and improve the quality of AI in tutoring and in these other use cases, and I'll finish here. We're not sure how far the frontier labs in OpenAI and Google and Anthropic are going to be able to go in education. They have to make money, they have shareholders, and education is unfortunately not at the top of the list. Google has been an amazing partner to us. You see them as a sponsor to this conference. I hope you see that as a signal of how serious they are about education. So we're going to be forming partnerships with these different labs to work on an extended period of time over 2 years to work in deep partnership with districts and with teachers and with students to actually see how their models can be better in those places. And then those will become part of the production models, hopefully, that all of you are applying in your research. We also want to have other bets on the table. We're going to be funding, as I mentioned last night, the development of open source models where you can, where all of the training, all of the IP around the model itself is completely open. We have an RFP out right now for $8 million to fund the development of a tutoring-specific AI model that will be completely open source. Third, there are new tools on the market that a relatively normal software engineer at a company, at an ed tech company, can use to actually get their hands on the model and improve it. So these are the new Microsoft tools that allow for fine-tuning and for different orchestrations of models. These are tools like Tinker. And so if the first path says that the new models are going to come from the frontier labs, and the second one says that it might come from the open source community, the third one says they might come from the ed tech companies themselves, we're going to be making bets in all 3 of these different areas. I'll pass it back to you, Zach.
So I just wanted to discuss how I come at an interest in chatbots and why this panel was proposed, at least from my point of view. So we had a workshop on the 27th on the integration of chatbots into an open source adaptive tutoring platform based on intelligent tutoring system principles.
I'm sure we're fine.
It's like, okay, it's like a heat wave warning, perhaps. Yeah, we've noticed. And in that workshop, we discussed the different developments in research. We had some great invited speakers. Chelsea Wang and Kirk Vanacore were 2 who brought some valuable perspectives I hope to hear from today. Actually, can you 2 raise your hand just so I could see where you are? Okay, Chelsea there. Kirk maybe incoming. And this tutoring system is part of, I don't know, you could say, emerging open source infrastructure that we began to develop in 2019. So we've been developing this tutor, adaptive tutor, not AI tutor, for about 6 years now. It's based on principles of ITS that have been very diligently documented by a number of people who have been nominated for Lifetime Achievement Awards at AI Ed. Developing it alongside instructors, co-designing features of it, making sure it's accessibility compliant, right? Some of these, I wouldn't say boring features, perhaps from an AI Ed research point of view, but things that need to be done in order for these technologies to have uptake. And then, of course, after we released it in 2023 in a Chi publication, GenAI comes along. And so how does GenAI affect the development of an open source resource? This is all MIT licensed, Creative Commons. And it resulted in several grants, some local to UC Berkeley, to implement it in about half of our intro STEM courses. So it's now in data science, physics, calculus, and one other, and chemistry. But the question became, how do we use Gen AI to address these course creation, adaptive tutor creation? Because we didn't have the kind of institute money to spend, and we had previously taken a year to develop every textbook, and that's not fast enough. And so Gen AI came out, and we conducted a series of studies to see how well can Gen AI do some of the production of elements of a tutor. How well can it create the assessments? Are the assessments having IRT properties using psychometric evaluation methods that are on par with textbook question properties? The answer was yes. Does Gen AI create hints that are on par with the learning gain efficacy of human-authored hints? The answer was yes. Not more performant, but on par with, not a statistical significant difference. And then can we align those resources to the syllabi of the instructor? Can the instructor also be a contributor to the design of those resources? Sorry, I double-clicked there. So these are the Gen AI. And we have a tool called Prompt Hive that helps these instructors or subject matter experts be part of the generative AI process, in fact, be the drivers of the process. They're now, instead of directly authoring content, they are curating prompts that produce the content, and then we run these analyses. Okay, so what does this all, does any of this have to do with chatbots? Why am I talking about ITS? And I think it does, because one, these components that have been tested individually of generating psychometrically valuable questions and producing hints that produce learning are certainly components of what you would expect an AI LLM chatbot to do. So if it's passing the test with Gen AI for creating components of an ITS, does that therefore mean that it's also perhaps some aspect of readiness for dialogue, conversational agents? And so I asked this question, what is the unique value add of AI chatbots on top of ITS? And I'm not asking, personally, my perspective, I'm not asking this question from a prejudicial standpoint, where I think there's not going to be a value add, but rather with a slight bias towards the incumbent technology, right? ITS, in part, is a subset of what a human tutor does. The current instantiation of foundation models, you could also say, is a subset of what a human tutor does. What additional learning can conversational agents, educational chatbots provide that ITS can't? And I think maybe the panelists will have some ideas, maybe you have some ideas, but we incorporated this into the OA Tutor platform, oatutor.io, so that this question can be asked by an undergrad even and experimented with, as well as established research labs. Okay, so that's where I'm coming at it. And I'll hand it over to Ashok.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Zach, for organizing this panel. You already heard my talk, so I don't have a lot to add, but I'll add one thing. When we talk about generative AI, LLMs, conversational AI agents, we talk them as general purpose technologies. But we know that learning varies a lot depending on the user and the context and the culture and so on. Are these general purpose technologies then in serious need for augmentation, amplification for something to build on top of that? I'll take a specific example. So one of our primary learning contexts is Technical College System of Georgia, about which I talked briefly. There are students, about 300,000 students, many of whom don't have a high school diploma. They're getting the GED equivalent on the way. They are much younger than I am, and the adoption rate is really low. This is the same problem that Khan Academy is dealing with Khan Amigo. The adoption rates are low. Now, because the adoption rates are low, therefore, we don't see the effect on learning that we were hoping for. So the question then becomes, how do we increase the adoption rate? So for these conversational agents now, our primary goal at this particular point for the next 6 months is to see whether we can add voice and we can put them on mobile phones. Now, that's a totally different view that one began with as a general purpose technology. Now suddenly the issue is not the technology or its functionality, the issue is how do you interact with it through voice on a mobile phone. Because this is a generation, that's what it's used to. They want to talk with everything with Jill. They don't want to type text on a laptop. They want to talk to Jill Watson on their iPhone. So the point similarly, another finding is that people who are older adults, 40 or above, tend to ask a lot many more questions of Jill Watson than younger adults. That would suggest, if correct, if this can be replicated, then that would suggest that we think in terms of supporting older adults in a manner very different from the way we support younger adults. Again, the only thing I would add here is to think in terms of these really powerful technologies that we are having, that they need to be, we need to build on them for specific contexts, and that will be one of the frontiers in the coming years.
All right, thank you. All right, so let's start with the first theme here, which is controversies. So I'm in a school of education. I go to AERA sometimes. Thank you. And if you see the keynotes at AERA, there's a lot of concern about AI. A lot of it is a lot more amplified in lower grade levels, right? Early grade school conversations, and also it's mixed in with device usage concerns, relationships that users have with AI. But I actually want to zero in on a very specific concern that was raised and kind of went viral on April 15th. It was a piece by Dan Myers, kind of editorial. And the title of the editorial was Rest in Peace Conmigo and EdTech Industry Dreams of AI Tutors. And in this piece, which was highly circulated, I think in part by just AI dissenters in one, but he used very careful clips from an interview with Matt Barnum. And here's some quotes, and Bryan, I'll ask you to say what's fact and fiction in the perception that this gave. For a lot of, this is quoting Dan Meyer. For a lot of students, it was a non-event. Con told Matt Barnum last week in Chalkbeat, referring to Conmigo's release 3 years ago. They just didn't use it much, he continued. Khan Academy's chief academic officer, Kristen DeSerbo, gave a similar assessment. So far, I am not seeing the revolution in education. And it goes on like this. This is an academic venue, so we care about peer-reviewed published research, but I think we can't afford to ignore what the popular buzz is about technology, because we do have ambitions for it to be widely adopted, right? And if the perception, the narrative has been soured, and we weren't aware of that, that could be disadvantageous for us. So yeah, Bryan, what do you make of this?
So first of all, are my friends from Khan Academy here? Because I'd hate to talk about, I don't want to report on your behalf the results that you've gotten in sort of your context, because I'd be happy to pass the mic to you to talk a little bit about the results that you've seen. All right, I will do my best. Oh, there you go. So I'll do my best, and please, I'm going to pass the mic to you to please correct whatever I might not get right. So Khan Academy, I have a grant with Khan Academy. They've been an amazing partner. Their team represents some of the brightest machine learning engineers, and they legitimately care about making sure that an evidence base is represented in their products. I think one of the things that we saw, so I'll say a couple different things. One of the things that Khan Academy has shown over and over again is that if students use it 30 minutes per week, or they level up from what are called 65 skills, that learning growth exceeds expectations by about 35%. They've been able to show that at a very large N size. Am I so far more or less correct? Okay, so far good. Now, the challenge is therefore, how do you make sure that students get to that level of usage? And I'm sure you've seen the piece by a guy named Lawrence Holt called the 5% problem. One of the most frequently repeated results that we see in education technology research is that only about 5% of students get to the dosage needed to get to efficacious learning. and that by and large, the students that get to those levels are already on grade level and already relatively well economically. So they're not actually benefiting the students that we sort of want education technology to get to. One of the things that I think Saul correctly reported was that when Conmigo is given to a school district, or Khan Academy Classroom, as the new product is named, is given to a district, and not supported, not integrated, you do see those 5% numbers repeated where that low number of students are actually using it. However, when the Khan Academy team was able to work very closely with the curriculum team, the coaching teams, to integrate it with the use of their core curriculum, to integrate it with training, you saw those efficacious usage levels go up to 30%. But I want to remind us all, like, that's also a finding that we've found over and over again in education research. Technology is not the thing. It's how technology is integrated into the classroom. And AI does not suddenly allow us to sort of defy the laws of gravity about what's actually going to bring technology to be relevant in the classroom. So I want to sort of put that context on the table. But I also want to mention one other thing. So Saul, would you agree with me that Saul is really good at hyping up sort of the promise of technology? So I think one of the things that Dan Meyer tapped into, I mean, Dan loves to beat up on Khan Academy and AI generally, but I think he's also tapped into a genuine, legitimate fear that is in the water right now about we missed the boat with social media and the negative effects that it's had on children, and we don't want to see the same thing happen with AI. And I think because Khan so publicly has advertised all the benefits of AI, I think he made himself an easy target for it. And so I don't want us to miss that genuine, legitimate concern that exists out there that we have to be careful about how AI is being used. But I also want to say, as my friend John Whitmer said, the 5% issue is not the law of the land. When a district is well supported, when a district is given a reason to integrate that work into the classroom, you do see these levels of gains. That's why we have that partnership model that we have, because that's where you see those levels of usage.
And so just maybe to clarify the observed effect sizes of the intervention of Conmigo, Ashok, you mentioned it's somewhere between 0.5 and 0.8. Is that only among the 5% who reach the threshold dosage? Is that what you're referring to?
That's my understanding, and you can correct me, that when Conmigo has succeeded in getting up to, thank you, Bryan. You can correct me, please, if I say it wrong. Conmigo has been successful in some conditions with the improvement of about 0.4 to 0.8 standard deviation about the mean score, but it has succeeded for those 5% of the population where the adoption rate was high. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think, hey everybody, Daniel from Khan Academy. I agree with that. I agree with what the panelists are saying. I think one clarification I'd like to make is that it's not so much this 5% that we used to classify as the high achieving students who are just achieving more. More specifically, I think what gives me hope, and maybe can give others in this room hope, is that it has to do with almost this 5% that have a disposition for it. And those 5% with the disposition to adopt the tool and to use it in good faith and push themselves for more learning, they are not necessarily historically high performers. And so we've seen the largest effect size with this kind of cross product of historically low performing, but with a good disposition to try the tool and to use it in good faith and to ask the right questions.
Great point.
I'll add one more thing, Zach, to the point you are making. So we have been doing surveys of students at Georgia Tech in TCST about their dispositions and attitudes towards AI right from the beginning. And over the last 2 years, there has been a change. They see so much about AI on the social media that their attitudes towards AI are now a lot more negative than they were 2 years back. The result is that just going into the classroom, they were more welcoming of AI interventions 2 years back than they are now. Yep. And so I don't quite know what to do about it because this is so much dependent on what they read on the social media, but it's becoming a problem.
So maybe finishing up the controversies angle here, your RFPs, Bryan, if we think about the hype curve, maybe we're at the trough of disillusionment. Maybe it keeps going down a little bit more. are these RFPs intended to bring us to that slope of enlightenment? I guess, how do you see the RFPs with respect to this conversation about controversies?
Sure. So I appreciate you asking that. So I started by talking about just how poorly these frontier models are doing in very basic tutoring benchmarks that Dora Dembski and her team showed in that paper that's called TeachLM. What I didn't talk about, which was the sort of second half of the paper, is where I think I have a lot of hope and where those RFPs are intended to put really necessary resources into the market for all of you to use. So one of the things that Dora and her team were able to do is they applied some very basic low-rank adaptation fine-tuning techniques using relatively modest numbers of tutoring interactions, and they used it to fine-tune open source models. And they were able to, after maybe 7 or 8 fine-tuning runs, to get those open source models nearly on par with the performance of expert tutors just on those simple benchmarks. And so what that tells me is what I think all of us already know. The frontier labs are not really paying a lot of attention to education. They're not really putting a lot of effort into making sure that the models are trained in education. And so right now they perform pretty poorly. But Dora's work also shows us that the ceiling is pretty high, and that a relatively low amount of marginal effort are going to be able to show a very rapid rate of improvement in these models if we can just finally put the resources that we need to see into education specifically. Jeremy Rochelle, my partner here, is in the audience. That's the whole idea behind this AI infrastructure program. And think of these RFPs, the benchmarks, trying to provide a benchmark of quality for these very important domains, putting a very high quality domain specific tutoring model. Think of all this as a down payment for a long-term commitment that the Gates Foundation has to trying to make sure that these resources are brought to education, and the benefits that all of you are researching every day can accumulate into our field and to students in the classroom. So yes, that is the idea, Zach.
All right, thank you. So let's go to the second topic, lessons learned, and already somewhat transitioning to that. And Ashok, I'll turn to you. I think we met at AAAI, and you were presenting Jill Watson results of having implemented a AI chatbot in a higher education course setting in a scalable way, and that was 2018, right? So something ahead of its time that feels like, well before the current generation of LLMs. And so I guess I'd ask you, can you reflect on Jill Watson, that experience? Because to me, it almost feels like deja vu, right? The first thing that you see a lot of higher education instructors doing is implementing an LLM in a similar way, maybe to Jill Watson, but you can correct that. So what kind of lessons learned do you take from Jill Watson? And where are you seeing Jill Watson and that knowledge-based technology still being perhaps superior to an LLM option?
Yeah. That's a great question. So let me share a couple of things about how Jill Watson has developed. First, data can be your friend, it can also be your enemy. So I was talking about how data can be your friend in my talk, but I'll now illustrate how data can be your enemy. So the Jill Watson of 2018, the way it worked was, it collected questions that students had asked on the online discussion forums over years, so thousands and thousands of questions. It saw what replies human TAs had given, and that became the question-answer pair, a sort of a large database of question-answer pairs stored in IBM's Watson platform. If a new question came, then Jill Watson of that time found the question most similar to the new question and found the response that a human TA had given, and just repeated it. And that got us into huge trouble because of gender discrimination. So data can be an enemy. In that particular class at that time, in that online program, there was about 85% of the students were male and only 15% were female. So the data was skewed towards the kind of questions that men were asking and against questions that women were asking. And we found out about that in late 2018 when male students said, my wife and I are expecting a baby, and I may need to take a couple of weeks off in the middle of the semester. And Jill Watson said, no problem, and congratulations, welcome to the new addition to your family, and so on, because that's the response some human TA had given to a similar question previously. A little bit later, a female student said, I'm pregnant and I may need to take a couple of weeks off. And Jill Watson simply said, welcome to the class, nothing more. And so the question became, why? Why did Jill Watson have such different responses to a male student and a female student? Because in that particular student population, the question of pregnancy had never come up earlier. So there was never a previous question about, I am pregnant, and never a human response about that. Jill Watson did not have the data to answer, so it did the minimum possible. Now, of course, this kind of discrimination is totally unacceptable, and we had to put an end to Jill Watson, or to that version of Jill Watson in 2018. So now the version that Jill Watson runs does not use previous data about questions asked and responses given for humans, because that has built-in biases into it. So in that sense, one lesson learned is that anytime you're dealing with data, one might say that we should have envisioned this, but we did not. So to some degree, I'll take the blame for that, but data can be your enemy. So that's one lesson learned. Another lesson learned is that, we were just talking about it earlier, adoption rates are nowhere close to what we were hoping they will be. So we can introduce Jill Watson in a class, but very few students. In Georgia Tech, the number of students who interact with is at 80% or higher. But at Technical College System of Georgia, the number of students who are interacting is 20% or lower. So I think that result is somewhat similar to the Khan Academy results that you are getting. And so the real question, or not the real quandary becomes, how do you even improve the adoption rate, given that students are entering their classrooms with a more negative view of AI than they did 2 years back? One tendency that I think we tend to have is that if my technology is not working, something is obviously wrong with the user. They're not using it the right way. But I think we want to ask ourselves, are we providing the right kind of user experience? And maybe we want to think in terms of conversational agents, as I was saying earlier, that are available on mobile phones. Because for the younger generation, they don't want to type text on laptops.
And do you see LLMs having the same weakness as Jill Watson, in that the training data biases the response? And did you see any improvement, right? So are AI chatbots, at least foundation models without added architecture, an improvement on that particular scenario?
My sense is that the early versions of ChatGPT that were released by OpenAI in 2022 had many of the same problems. In fact, in some cases, worse problems. They were very toxic, had huge amounts of hallucinations, but things have improved dramatically. So ChatGPT 5.4 and 5.5 show a lot less hallucinations and have a lot fewer biases than they did 2 or 3 years back. So things are really improving, but I don't know whether they are where we want them to be. So, and here's what I mean by that. Would you send your children to any classroom where you thought that the human teacher hallucinates? No way any of us would agree to that proposition. Why would you send your children to a classroom in which there is an AI TA or instructor or cognitive partner that hallucinates? We would just not accept it. So in that sense, in learning and education, I think, Bryan, you were alluding to that. Industry is not necessarily investing a lot in that particular domain right now, but partly also the bar is so much higher than in, say, ordinary customer service. So in ordinary customer service, the penalty or the cost for being wrong is much lower than penalty and cost for being wrong in learning and education. So in that sense, learning and education is a very, offers very high bars where you do not want any toxicity and as few hallucinations as possible.
A side note on the use of hallucination, you wouldn't want an instructor hallucinating. Jeff Hinton, when I think ChatGPT first came out, he had a position on the word hallucination. he was saying we shouldn't use hallucination to describe the errors that LLMs make. We should use the word confabulation. That it isn't quite like a mushroom drug trip that hallucination suggests. So perhaps we also don't want students interacting with a model that confabulates either, but certainly not one that's on drugs. We don't want that either. Also speaking to hallucinations, we have some work coming out in scientific reports where we looked at the current hallucination rate of all the top foundation models across questions in 26 OpenStax textbooks. The interesting thing there is one, as you would expect, there's about 94% accuracy on average across all the textbooks. So you could say, well, that's a student level. So coast is clear, let's put chatbots into all of OpenStack's areas of content and not worry about it. But we did analysis at the fine-grained chapter and sub-lesson level for the textbooks that have sub-lessons. And for example, in physics, even though the average error rate, I'll call it, is at a student level, there are chapters that are in the 60s, right? And no, you wouldn't hire a TA, who scored a 60 on certain chapters. So maybe there's a takeaway that even if it looks like we're ready in certain areas, there needs to be finer grain analysis. I want to ask one more question of you, Ashok, when it comes to lessons learned, and really it's a follow-up question to your keynote. You mentioned that we have the foundation LLM models, but we don't have to use them as they are. I think that's also Bryan's point with RFPs. So we can augment them, and I think you mentioned infrastructure or architecture being added on. Where are you, how are you determining what the most important components to add on to the foundation model are? I know your institute is still ongoing, but what have you found so far are the most important augmentations?
So we have been very interested in two particular kind of augmentations. Well, the first is an augmentation, the other is a use, not quite an augmentation, but I'll cover that also. So the augmentation side, we have been very interested in lowering the degree of hallucinations, toxicity, confabulations, if you wish. We have been very interested, most of all, in grounding LLMs in theories of cognition and learning. So we expect, again, from human teachers that they know something about, perhaps just based on experience, not necessarily a PhD in education, but just based on their experience, they understand a little bit about how students learn and how they should teach in order to be an effective teacher. But LLMs have not been, like you mentioned, Bryan, made for learning and education. These are sort of very general purpose engines. And because they are general purpose, they are not grounded in theories of learning and cognition, which creates a huge problem. That creates a gap. So a lot of our work has been on augmenting them to not only reduce hallucination and toxicity, but to ground them in theories of cognition and learning. The other aspect that we have found, we are spending a lot of time and energy is on looking at classical intelligent tutoring systems. And I don't know whether I want to use the term tutoring system. I'll use the term intelligent learning environment, but we can get into that debate later. And thinking about all the knowledge that is needed for intelligent tutoring systems, whether we can acquire them from LLMs. And it turns out that LLMs are a very powerful tool. So in the Ivy project, for instance, you give the instructional text about how to, let's say, a cookbook recipe of how to make omelets out of eggs. And from there alone, and from the schema of TMK models, these LLMs can extract the entire TMK model, which is a very powerful thing to do. So that's, I think, the second place where we have found a lot of use.
For the grounding in cognitive models and learning sciences, what's the technical approach you take to ground them in those things?
So one of them has a lot to do with the prompting. So like we were talking about the multimedia version of Jill Watson. So the principles of multimedia learning have been known for a very long time. And human teachers have been generating this multimedia content. We can use AI to generate that multimedia content much more efficiently. But then we have to tell the AI, well, I want you to generate content, but I want you to follow these principles. And if you do that, then it can, in fact, generate multimedia content that follows that principle. So the potential is there, the power is there, but we have to harness it well. So that's one area where prompting becomes important.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, please.
So one of the things I really want to encourage everybody to look more and more into is just the general innovations that are coming through a harness-based architecture and the use of agents to actually be involved in the improvement process of the products themselves. There's a really amazing product called CoTeach, which is part of Teaching Lab Venture Studios. And it's basically a tool that's designed to help teachers plan lessons and create worksheets and things like that around illustrative mathematics. The team there developed a coding agent off of a LLM as a judge that they created simply to do good diagrams that they would go into worksheets. They were finding that the AI models were creating diagrams that just looked silly. They were misdiagrammed, the proportions on triangles were off and things like that. They created a LLM as a judge that could look at a diagram and tell you whether or not it was done correctly. They gave that LLM as a judge to a coding agent, and they said, try as many things as you possibly can to fix the code inside of our application. And over the course of a week, in basically training itself, it went from about 40% accuracy in creating diagrams to about 95% accuracy, and the AI basically taught itself how to become better. That's a real interesting innovation where I think seeing that in more and more spaces, I think is going to be a really exciting new area of innovation.
All right, so speaking of innovation, this is our last category, and this is where I'll bring the audience in on this, which is ways forward. We hear of some vectors of direction for development of LLMs. I think there's also the question of where do current legacy AI ed systems end and AI tutors begin, or are they simultaneously offered? Is there complementarity there? But then also what aspects of human-computer interaction might we be missing in this conversation about AI tutoring? And so I want to open it up right now, and maybe starting with a comment over here, Chelsea Wang, who does work, as Ashok referenced, on mutual theory of mind, but also socially supporting AI agents. So ways forward, what are your ideas on that?
So I think for me, a couple of things just to call back to what we have discussed so far. One is evaluation. So when we talk about actually deploying AI agents into these learning contexts, so both Bryan and Ashok, you talk about how a lot of the teachers or even students are not using them. What does that tell us about evaluation? Does that mean that the current evaluation or benchmarks that we have are not very grounded in how the AI agents are currently used by the humans? So I come from this from a very human-computer interaction perspective. So some of the things that we've been thinking about is actually how can we actually look into how students or users in general interact with AI agents? How can AI be integrated into their workflow? So that we can distill these evaluation guidelines from what the actual interactions happened, and also what the users or students or teachers actually need from the AI agents. Yeah, so I think that would be my main argument. And the other thing that I want to touch upon is how, I guess also related to evaluation, but also related to design, is in HCI, we have a long history of designing interface that interact with users and students and teachers in a very single-shot way. But now we have conversational AI or generative AI that can continuously and iteratively interact with users. What does that tell us about design, and what does that tell us about evaluation? Or my final point is actually related to risks and harms. So I think so far the field of responsible AI have focused a lot on one-shot risks and harms. For example, toxicity, bias that are embedded in one single AI-generated responses. But what are some harms that are slowly emerging through these kind of continuous and very iterative interactions? So I think we have already seen that in a lot of the AI companion contexts, for example. Users are forming these parasocial bonds or emotional reliance on AI agents. And these bonds are formed by these iterative interactions with AI companions that the AI companions are continuously reinforcing that I can understand you, or like I totally get what you're saying, or what you're feeling right now. So a lot of these harms and risks are iteratively emerged. How can we design interventions or even design evaluations or even AI agents that can intervene at the right time when these early signs of harms emerge, instead of just trying to mitigate those after the harms are already established? So, yeah.
Thank you, Chelsea. Is Kirk here? Kirk Banacor, line 1. Okay, his loss. All right, why don't we open it up to questions?
Sorry, this might not be so much of a question, but maybe it'll inspire some questions. So Daniel from Khan Academy again. I will say that when we think about the ways forward, we found a lot of new insights at Khan Academy over the last year. Specifically, I think that when we first implemented Conmigo, it was this AI chatbot on the side. And we were violating some edtech principles about spatial contiguity, about making an intuitive interface. Like you mentioned, there were some basic design principles that, because of the rush that we had to get Conmigo out, we didn't maybe plan ahead with our older interfaces. Over the last year, we have actually piloted a completely new Khan Academy reimagined experience. And we have seen a big change in effect size. Now, effect size, I'll use that term loosely, because what we're indexing on is efficacious dosage. And we're very lucky at Khan Academy that we have this thing to anchor on, efficacious dosage, which has journals written about it and papers published, where if the students get to 60 skills to proficient, they will do better on their state test scores, they'll learn more. And so we're very privileged because that gives us a very clear goal with our AI chatbot. We don't necessarily need the AI chatbot to do X, Y, Z. We just need the AI chatbot to get students to get to 60 skills to proficient. And because we know that there are so many challenges with adoption, how can we get those students that historically, the other 95% that would fall through the cracks, to push forward? And so in this new interface that we designed, which starts to abide by a lot better design principles, we are seeing a 20% increase in students reaching efficacious dosage, with the AI chatbot being roughly the same power, the same models, the same math accuracy, right? We've been making improvements along the way over the last year, but just by changing the interface and the motivation systems and the way that students engage with it, we're suddenly getting students to learn more. And it wasn't by focusing on the chatbot per se, but it was by changing the systems around it. So that would be my recommendation for ways to move forward, is ask yourself, like, is what I'm creating in my paper or in my new product something that is engageable by the average second grader, third grader, fourth grader, somebody that is historically demotivated or that is skeptical, especially now as more and more users are becoming skeptical of AI. And so that, I think, is our mission at Khan Academy, at least me specifically. It's how can I get, not 5%, but a much more larger percentile of users to push forward with their own learning and push past it. And I think at the end of the day, the thing that offers me hope is that one teacher in the classroom cannot answer the question of 30 students concurrently. They all have different questions. They all struggle with different problems. Even when working on the same worksheet, they all get stuck on different points. And so when you realize that fundamental bottleneck, that students need some kind of intervention to get unstuck in their learning, so that if they're at 45 skills in the year right now to get to 46, that actually offers me a lot of optimism, because I know that at the end of the day, these AI chatbots are one of the most promising potential ways to get that student in that moment the help that they need to answer the next question and to keep practicing, because it's just about practice. It's about getting skills to proficient. So that's my recommendation, or push forward, or maybe it inspires more questions, is how can we design our systems to be palatable and usable by users? But yeah.
Just to plus one thing you're saying, One thing that I know you and your team do, and many other of the ed techs that we get a chance to work on, the way they do that is they have a simple metric like you're talking about, but it's not the engineering team and it's not the research team at the end of the day that just gets to decide whether or not the product's good enough. The only voice that actually gets to say it's good enough is that student or that teacher. And they don't stop working on it until that voice is the one that says, now you're done. Now I can bring this into my classroom. That's the difference.
First, a quick comment and then a question. Quick comment on the 5% problem. I just want to remind folks that one of the messages of our earlier work with cognitive tutors, the 1997 ITS Goes to School in the Big City, was that you need to think about the curriculum integration problem. And what we did is we wrote a textbook with teacher collaboration and cognitive science input that was meant to be used 3 days a week. So there were 2 days a week available for in-class use of the tutoring system. And there was less use than we desire, but there wasn't a 5% use. It was way higher than that. And I think we need to revisit that. It's hard to do, but most technology is used as a supplement now. It's not integrated with a textbook. And so I just want to put that out there. My question is, I guess a kind of challenge. I have this hypothesis that the answer to the chatbot's question is no. That the best use of AI is either offline, as Ashok and others were discussing, to essentially create more effective deterministic algorithms that implement intelligent tutoring systems, with one exception. Analyzing natural language or open-ended responses live, LLMs are great at that, right? And that's the place where we should use them online. Otherwise, do most of the stuff offline. Agree or disagree?
I very much agree, Ken. I'm going to relate what you just said to something Chelsea said. She used the term continuous improvement. I think there is an underexplored opportunity, and you're alluding to that, of continuous learning, not just in the classroom, but in whatever setting we are. Because at least in human life, we learn continuously. We are learning from each other, one another right now, although there is no formal. And I think LLMs can help there a lot in terms of continuous improvement, continuous learning outside the formal classroom. But that's underexplored.
Chapter on adaptive systems has this design loop adaptivity, which is one version of that continuous data-driven improvement, but in the whole, for everybody, not just for individual students, but yeah.
I agree too, and just want to say, I think Zach, when you put this panel together, I think you were sort of imagining that we were thinking about a chatbot interacting with a student. But I think part of what you're pointing out, Ken, is like, the teachers are the ones that are looking for just as much guidance and just as much support, and these LLMs are really good at helping them notice which students are speaking more than others, notice if boys are speaking more than girls, noticing if the different question stems that they're bringing to the classroom are actually getting a discussion going. And that, I think, there's also far less complicated data sharing issues when you're dealing with adults versus kids. So I think +1 to what you're saying, Ken, and I think that I want us to sort of think about this just not working with kids, but also with the adults in the classroom.
I just want to add, I like the existence of a hypothesis that the chatbot should be used only perhaps for this kind of open-ended follow-up question or similar, which is why we developed the chatbot into an open system so that could be empirically explored. Let's see, we got a question there and then there. So in the back first. Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm Ellen Ilku from TIB in Germany. It's very interesting that we are all using the language models, of course, but the language models are usually developed by the NLP community, the natural language processing. They are evaluated with NLP automated metrics such as the recall, the F1 score, that they do not reflect education. Right. At the same time, usually when we do evaluation on our user studies, we do the evaluation that I call me and my friends. Me and my teacher friends, me and my classroom friends, because we never reach these very big numbers that the results can be actually reproducible. We are always talking about that specific class, that specific study, and many times we cannot reproduce any of the findings. I believe we need, it's a very initiative, if I may say, Bryan, the initiative to create the benchmarks, 100%. But maybe we also need to focus on the metrics. Currently, we do not have automatic metrics for education to capture all of these changes that are happening, that maybe right now the content is created and then we are passing through the review process more rather than creating it. Or if whatever is created or it's offered to the teacher or the student is actually relevant, is actually useful, and it contributes to learning or not. I would like your thoughts on it.
Totally agree. One of the things that we did intentionally this time around with these benchmark RFPs is that they are not actually, benchmark is sort of the end artifact of the project, but the things that are also required to be developed in the project are a broad series of what we would call evaluators. So if the benchmark is kind of the summative assessment, the evaluators are the smaller measures, the sub-constructs of quality that make up that larger use case of tutoring or offering a student feedback or coaching a teacher. Those are also going to be required. I think that's getting a little bit into what you're saying about these smaller measures that our hypothesis is that if we can shine a light on how these models are actually doing, then we're going to have a little bit more motive. The people in the community that are developing these models and those of you in the research community that can actually potentially rival them, that you're going to be more and more curious to demand access to those types of measures. And then the third thing that are required in these RFPs is the development of large gold standard data sets. So that when you actually want to get to work on improving the model or the product underneath, you've got a set of data in hand that does a good job of representing what actually is going on in a classroom. So I totally agree that that has to be part of the emphasis. And it's got to be part of sort of the chain of things that we hope happen when we are able to shine a light on how well or how poorly these models or these products are actually performing.
Great talk. So to follow on to the chatbots question, exclamation, I like the answer no, but we need to qualify that. So there is a yes and a no. There's these opportunities, and us as researchers, we're trying to discover those. All sorts of things come to mind. The students having chatbots always in their face, that's clearly not going to work for them, and I'm not hearing that proposed. But students, they're directly impacted by these and will be in ways we don't even quite understand yet. So I have a daughter who's 12 years old on the autism spectrum. I'm on the spectrum myself. So I can sort of understand how she perceives some of these things, but especially during COVID when I'd observe her interactions with class materials, auditory, visuals, so like the color of a response to getting it wrong can be very, very alarming to the extent where she would cover her ears and, you know, fortunately she didn't get many wrong, but it was like a very traumatic experience. And even riding in a car now, I try and start the grok and she'll have a meltdown. It's like the unpredictability of the response drives her crazy. And I realize that's a minority, and even within the minority, it's a further minority. It's an individualized response. But the personalization of the experience and being able to completely disable it for the people who would be negatively affected, that's part of our research as well. And sorry for talking on so long. This talk is incredible, and I think we should chat more about it. Thanks.
Hi, Imran Hossain from Goethe University Frankfurt. We are currently having this bottleneck of focusing everything related to STEM, but what about the philosophical, ethical things we want to convey through chatbots or AI, because there are where the basis is that the educators judge the students based on what they say, and not on the content of the thing, that how they convey those messages. And if we want to do that on a scale with chatbots, how would you approach that thing? Maybe with a multi-agent system, but if then the educators would be only tracking those LLMs which are basically judging, and wouldn't that be more of a hassle than just listening to the students? What would be your suggestion on that?
Thank you for the question, for the comment also. Two things come to my mind. One is that I think in our community have a tendency to focus a lot on AI technologies, like chatbots, but not sufficiently on the data about the learner and the learning. So one way of thinking about what you're talking about, I think, Imran, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Is to think in terms of, if we were to work with, let's say, in a class on philosophy or class on poetry, how do we collect that data, and how do we make sense of that data so that we can inform the chatbot and the teachers who are using the chatbot in the right way? And I think a worry about overemphasis on technology and underemphasis of the data. So earlier I was talking about how data can be our enemy, and it was at one point, but data can also be our friend. So how to use that data effectively, and that requires a completely different infrastructure, not that of technology, but that of data, how to extract that data. There's one other very quick comment. At least in our institute, the investment we are making is to think in terms of not one person interacting with one tool, but a community of tools working together to help one person. And so if you're using the term multi-agent, I'm going to use the term multi-agent in a slightly different way than you were using, I think. To think in terms of not just a chatbot, not just an intelligent tutoring system, but also an inquiry-based learning environment. So a large number of tools working together, but not just tools so that the user has access to all of them, but tools that are talking to each other. In the following sense that, for example, Jill Watson says to Sammy, Imran has asked me a question. You have done some analysis about a personality. What can you tell me about it? And that data is available in a form that Sammy put it somewhere, but Jill Watson can extract and use it. And that requires a shared data architecture. So these tools are not simply there as a community of tools. These are sort of really, truly collaborating with one another. And so that might be one way of thinking about it.
I just want to underscore that an ecosystem of tools. So maybe that's a potential way forward the AI ed community can think of, right? Yeah, I agree. The chatbots are part of that ecosystem. Even an improved foundation model isn't the end-all be-all. Right. It's adapted to different contexts and so forth. So, yeah, great question and comment. Let's see if we can get two more questions in.
I've got one here. So first, I really appreciate you bringing up the controversies that you brought up. I think that Dan Meyer's comments really deserve to be discussed more openly, especially because of the claims that were made. I think following up on Ashok, your question and the earlier comment about evals, what do you think we could do, or do you think we should make incentives for common evaluations that are common evals, not evaluations, but common evals done around features that are come out of chatbots? Could we have common constructs that we measure, say, between higher education and K-12 constructs? Very aware of the work Stanford Scale is doing, for example, around looking at research done in AI. We're doing some work around structured literature review, and we're finding that it's very, very, very hard in order to try to create consistent and comparable results. So this issue around replication. And so I'm wondering, I guess, kind of two things. One of them is a question, should we have common evals? Is that a good idea? And if so, is there a place for this community to develop them? Because like Blue and Meteor and semantic similarity are all fine, but they really don't get it whether learning is happening or not. And so is that something we could do? I have a position about that, but I want to hear from you.
That's a really important question. Yesterday there was a panel that on educational assessment that dealt a little bit with that. And in that panel, if I remember correctly, there was a debate whether this standardization is a good idea or not a good idea. My sense of that panel and my own sense is that before we think about standardization, we want to think in terms of what exactly are we evaluating? And then how are we evaluating? So are we evaluating, for example, critical thinking? Are we evaluating passing formative assessment? So what exactly are we, what exactly is the goal of that evaluation? And that's connected with the goal of learning. So that's one aspect to it. The other aspect is, are we going to use exams, quizzes, projects, portfolios, profiles? What exactly are we going to use for it? So I think standardization is going to depend on both of those things, both on what we want to evaluate and how we want to evaluate it. So it's not an answer to your question, just sharing some comments, some thoughts on my mind.
John, I'll just hold up, and Jeremy, you should talk more about this if folks have follow-on questions. I think there are different models of evaluation that are really underexplored, that are looking beyond just whether the moves of teaching or the moves of instruction or the moves of tutoring are happening. One of the interesting data challenges that the Driven Data team and the Digital Promise AI Infrastructure Program is about to run is a data challenge in partnership with NTO, where they're going to put out a series of tutoring conversations and then the exit tickets that follow those tutoring conversations. And the challenge is to develop a model that can more accurately predict whether learning actually occurred in the tutoring conversation and starting to train around that. That's a different construct than asking the question, did this look like tutoring? And I think that's a really interesting area of exploration that all of you can lend a lot of your skills and superpowers towards.
One more. Yep.
Hi, I'm Prerna. I'm a PhD student at MIT. So at MIT, we think a lot about the more constructionist project-based learning approach to classrooms. So I'm wondering if the panel can comment on how chatbots could be integrated into classrooms where students are not necessarily working one-on-one with the agent, but instead they're collaborating with other students actively, and learning takes place through a more socio-emotional approach. So I was wondering if they can comment on how the interaction paradigm might shift significantly with those classrooms. Yeah.
That's an easy question, so I'm going to give it to you. That's a really difficult question, therefore I'm going to...
Actually, I might refer to Chelsea there to comment.
I think, Prerna, that is a really good question. And in some of my PhD work done with Ashok, we explore Sammy, which is an AI agent that helps students to build social connections. So that kind of related to part of what you were talking about. So I think what we found is that students stay, and this has been established in the field of media studies for a long time, is computers are social actors. Students, no matter how we present the AI agents, they will attribute some kind of social qualities or characteristics to the AI agents. And they will form these social perceptions, which will definitely influence the collaborative dynamics. When you put an AI agent in a student group or in a human group in general, it will definitely have some impact on how people perceive each other, or even in Sammy's case about AI-mediated social interaction, of how the AI might misrepresent some characteristics of student A, for example, which will influence how student B perceives student A through this AI agent. So yeah, I guess I don't have a very clear answer to that right now, because this is a very uncharted area for a lot of us. But I think that's something to think about and to further explore on how AI in a student group can influence the collaborative dynamics. Yeah.
I'll just advise you to make sure you talk to the Khan Academy team. They've thought really deeply about how Khanmigo should be integrated into a classroom environment, how it fits into core instruction, how it fits into practice, how it fits into small groups. And when that is done well, that's when you see the efficacious usage. That's when you see the learning gains. It's the same product. It's just it's the way it's being used.
So Bryan, you said you assume that the pretense of this particular panel is chatbots, ? In the context of student to AI conversational agent. There's teacher to conversational agent. There's agent with multiple learners. All sorts of configurations that can be discussion topics for follow-up panels. So thank you, everybody. End here.
Thank you.